Today's passage comes from Luke chapter 3, verses 15 to 22. Hear the word of the Lord. As the people were filled with expectation and all were questioning in their hearts concerning John the Baptist, whether he might be Messiah, John answered all of them by saying, "I baptize you with water, but one who is more powerful than I is coming. I am not worthy to untie the thong of his sandal. He will baptize you with the Spirit of the Holy One and fire. His winnowing fork is in his hand to clear his threshing floor and to gather the wheat into his granary. But the chaff he will burn with unquenchable fire." So with many other exhortations, he proclaimed the good news to the people. But Herod the ruler, who had been rebuked by him because of Herodias, his brother's wife, and because of all the evil things that Herod had done, added to them all by shutting John up in prison. Now when all the people were baptized, and when Jesus also had been baptized and was praying, the heaven was opened. And the breath of the Holy One descended upon him in bodily form like a dove. And a voice came from heaven, "You are my Son, the beloved. With you I am well pleased." The word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. How do we expect God to show up? What do we expect God to do when God does show up? Perhaps the bigger question is whether we expect God to show up at all. All too often, it would seem God does not figure much into our calculations. We make our plans, we go through our days, and maybe hope that God might step in to somehow lighten the load, but we never really give a lot of thought to it. Perhaps we consider we might be the hands and feet of God in some or another instance, but do we have any real expectation of that? Would it be heavy lifting for God to surpass our expectations? Luke is clear there were a lot of expectations in Israel. Much of these concerned John the Baptist. Luke hardly unpacks it for us, though. We're not clear at a glance as to what the people were expecting, what they were hoping for. Well, obviously they were expecting Messiah, but it is unclear what they expected of Messiah. Even a cursory read, however, gives us a good idea that it did not match up all too well with what God had in store. They were looking for a human actor who would become a national hero of some kind. John had that same basic assessment. He just did not think he was that human actor God had in mind. God had something else planned, something altogether, something more. John pointed to someone of much greater importance than himself. He knew he had a role to play, but it was secondary. I didn't mean that John truly understood what God was planning with any greater clarity than the crowds who came out to him. John just knew that he was not the one they were awaiting. His role was different. He was a herald. He was not the main attraction. He was fulfilling an important task of preparing the way for the coming of the one who did matter. It was nothing more than that. He did not call the shots. He made ready for what was to follow after him. Luke's account seems to take a break mid-stride here. We need to know that John was imprisoned by Herod, and at least some of the circumstances around that. But Luke also wants to continue talking about Jesus' baptism. He closes his parenthesis about John's future arrest and takes us back to the people seeking John out, being baptized, converting, as it were, from a traditional or nominal Judaism to Yahweh. As Luke shifts his focus to Jesus, we hear a pronouncement from heaven. You are my Son, the beloved. With you I am well pleased. Whoa. That is a big statement. It's too big to follow quickly with much of anything. It certainly would have been anticlimactic to go from that to John's imprisonment. Rather, Luke takes a serious break in his narrative at this point. He mentions that Jesus was 30 years old when he began his ministry, and then he goes on and tells us about Jesus' genealogy, recounting where Jesus had come from, taking us all the way back to Adam. Adam, whom he names as Son of God. It gives us some time to reflect on the significance of that statement from heaven. You are my Son. That's huge. It flies in the face of all expectations surrounding Messiah, of what Yahweh might be willing to do. That again, Jesus' genealogy, as presented by Luke, takes us back to Adam, referenced as Son of God. This is no one-off comment by Luke that we can skip over or just brush aside as irrelevant. By no means is this a statement we are to consider unimportant. It may have been commonplace enough around the world of the ancient Near East to consider gods having children with mortals, but within Judaism, this was unprecedented, unparalleled. Luke has already presented a birth narrative that says that this child born of Mary had its origin in the breath of the Holy One. He clarifies this as meaning more than God's blessing Mary's pregnancy, as had been done for Sarah, Hannah, and a few others from time to time. Luke tells us Jesus is more than a human being set apart for service to Yahweh like Samuel or Samson. God is somehow making an appearance. Luke told us a couple of times in chapter 1 that Jesus would be called Son of God. In chapter 2, he has Jesus referencing God as Father. Now in chapter 3, Luke uses the term twice more. Heads up. We are to pay attention. These are not passing, unimportant comments. They're not thrown around with little to no meaning. They're earth-shattering statements in the context of Judaism. Perhaps the Greek and Roman pantheon were filled with demigods, but Judaism had no room for such. Yahweh had a series of prophets, men and women who spoke and acted for God, but the term Son of God was never used lightly. Luke has brought up the concept 5 times in 3 chapters, but before Jesus even begins his ministry. If there were expectation in Israel regarding Messiah, Luke has taken expectation to a whole new level. It's almost like Luke is saying, forget Messiah. God is taking up residence in human flesh. Judaism was rather clear there was but one entity worthy of being called God. All else were lesser beings, if they even existed. Yahweh did not share authority over human affairs with other celestial actors. Whatever and whoever they were in subjection to Yahweh, servants of Yahweh, or perhaps in some conflict as rebels of some lesser designation. Judaism clung tightly to the notion that there was no division in Yahweh. Hear, O Israel, Yahweh is our God, Yahweh alone. That was part of the words inscribed on the phylacteries and mezuzahs adorning entrances to their homes or hanging off the tassels of their clothing. If Yahweh had a son, that was Yahweh somehow in human flesh, inseparable from Yahweh in the heavenly realms. You are my son, the beloved. With you I am well pleased. Such a pronouncement from heaven spoke volumes. It obliterated so many expectations of Messiah, of Yahweh, of what and how Yahweh could and would interact with humanity. Too many voices in Judaism believed Yahweh too far removed to ever become present within the human context. There was no expectation that Yahweh might embrace the human condition, that the soil of human corruption would not prove too ugly, too wretched, too filthy, too smelly for Yahweh to come in direct contact, even with a nation chosen to bear Yahweh's name. Sacrifice and mediation were the only appropriate ways to approach Yahweh. For why would the master of the universe and deign to get too close, where our defilement might somehow rub off on the Holy One? If Yahweh were to make an appearance, it would be high on a clouded mountaintop or in the Holy of Holies in the Jerusalem temple. Walking the sweaty, dirty trails under a hot sun and dunking into the filthy waters of the Jordan was too far beneath expectations for the Holy One of Israel. And yet this is precisely what Luke is portraying. Yahweh was doing so much more than sending a human envoy within the frame of human expectations. Yahweh's initiative went much farther. It's easy to blame the Jews of so long ago for not seeing and not accepting what we have come to embrace and believe. We can make easy claims for things that we have heard while rocked to sleep in the cradle. The real issue is whether we have allowed God to reach past the limitations of our own set of expectations in which we would bind and limit God. If God wanted to do more than we expect in our lives, how would we respond? Would we be any more open to the unexpected in our midst?